So there's certain things that are generally unhelpful to say. So scaremongering is not useful, telling someone that they're going to die if they don't get treatment. Really kind of overt comparisons, like commenting on someone's physical appearance or comparing them to other people is generally unhelpful, because that really reinforces people's idea about body image as a kind of a prime issue. So talking to someone about eating disorders, obviously it's something that should be supportive and should be encouraging someone to get help, but it's also very delicate, and people can react in a negative way if they feel that it's confrontational, or they feel under threat, especially if they feel like their eating disorder is under threat, because sometimes the eating disorder is the best way they have at coping with things, and if someone's saying that you have to stop doing that, it can leave people feeling extremely vulnerable. So there's certain things that we would recommend. Non-confrontation being the overarching idea of how to do it, and then thinking about, okay, well, when is the best time to do it? It's probably not during a meal when emotions are already high and people are already kind of feeling upset. It would be better not at a meal, sometime that emotions are kind of naturally low, sometime that it's quiet, and that it can be a conversation that's done in a safe and sensitive way. The use of language is important as well, that the language not be confrontational. So it's maybe not a great idea to lead with your eating is abnormal, or I'm worried you're going to die, because that instantly brings people's emotion up very high. I think you'd be better off saying something along the lines of, I have noticed that you seem to be not seeing your friends as much, or I have noticed that you seem to be quite low, you seem to be quite anxious. I've noticed that you've been losing weight, and that I'm worried about you, rather than kind of launching into something that can be maybe taken as accusatory. Other things to do would be to kind of have done some of your homework beforehand. So have looked at the resources that are available for supporting someone with an eating disorder. Bodywise.ie is a very good resource for people in Ireland, because they have very clear guidance on what to do, who to talk to, how to access treatment. So having done the homework beforehand, having an idea that you have a plan, and you'd like someone to first talk to their GP with an idea that they might go for a further assessment, or that with the idea that actually before they go to the GP they might meet with someone from Bodywise and maybe just talk through what their problems are, just so they get a sense themselves about what treatment is out there, what their difficulties are, and where they might fit in with the idea of an eating disorder. And then I guess having a sense that eating disorders can't just be solved by a conversation. So that's not the objective of trying to have a supportive conversation with someone, that it's not something that they're just going to understand the logic of what you're saying, and therefore that they just won't have an eating disorder anymore. So the goal of the conversation should be in your head, that it's an idea to support, to plant a seed that you're still available, you're available anytime, and that you have some suggestions about, if they did want to try and get some help, what they might do. So there's certain things that are generally unhelpful to say. So scaremongering is not useful, telling someone that they're going to die if they don't get treatment. Really kind of overt comparisons, like commenting on someone's physical appearance or comparing them to other people, is generally unhelpful, because that really reinforces people's idea about body image as a kind of a prime issue. Avoiding shaming and blaming language, and trying to avoid making things overly simplistic, like all you need to do is eat more regularly, all you need to do is stop going and purging after you eat. Like those are not helpful, because the symptoms are much more complicated than that, and people can feel very invalidated if that's the feedback that they're getting when someone's trying to have maybe a more supportive conversation than that. So as with most things, the first step is recognizing that there's a problem, or at least having a curiosity that there might be a problem. So in other words, having an openness to having conversations, having an openness to seeking the first steps in assessment and potentially then referral on to a treating team. What I would say to any person who's worried that they might have an eating disorder, the first point of contact is always with primary care. We do a lot of work with the university GPs because that's who our kind of most of our referrals come from, but really any family GP should be able to access the local kind of expert services, whether that be directly to community psychiatry or actually skipping community psychiatry and going straight to a specialist service. Anyone that has access to private healthcare, there are a number of private eating disorder services as well, and the pathway is the same, that they would speak to their GP first and get a referral there. Once you've engaged with a team, it's really about having kind of an openness and a curiosity about exploring the eating disorder and trying to make some changes in your life. The first change that we usually try to get people to do is to engage with some idea of regular eating. So what we usually start doing is people would have 3 meals and 3 snacks over the course of the day. If people are restricting a lot, we would work with them to manage what they think they can do for those 3 meals and 3 snacks, but really that regularity is really an essential starting point. And for people that are concerned about binge eating, concerned about binging and purging, it's the same approach. If you're eating more regularly, you're not getting sudden hunger cues and you're less likely to suddenly start binging. And actually that can be a really, really stabilizing factor early on. And it's not a matter of jumping straight onto a very large meal plan, but it is a matter of introducing regularity from as early as possible. After that, we have a number of very effective psychological therapies which people with eating disorders engage with. The primary focus of the early stages of that is really working on motivation, because often people at early stages of treatment can be quite ambivalent, can be a little bit uncertain about what it is they're signing up for, and the idea that they're signing up to lose their eating disorder where actually they don't actually have any other coping skills can be really frightening. So working on the motivation, working on why people want to change, what they would like their life to look like, and that can be done with a variety of different approaches, usually along the lines of maybe using visualization techniques, thinking about what your life would be like in 3 years, 5 years if you didn't have the eating disorder, what your life would be like if you did have the eating disorder, what you would say to yourself now if you were looking back then. So there's different ways to kind of work on your motivation to change, and then working on developing new coping skills. So like I said, you can't just take the eating disorder away if people have no coping skills left. Developing new ones so that when they come up against the stresses in their life, that they don't fall back on the eating disorder. They have ways to cope with it that are more adaptive and more helpful for the future. There's always a significant role for other support, usually from people's parents, people's husbands, wives, children, depending on what stage they're at in their lives. And that can be challenging because they are not experts, but there's a number of different things that people in those situations, your carers, for want of a better word, that they can learn skills to try and improve things from kind of their carer point of view as well. So we often direct people to work with Bodywise. They have it's called peer-led resilience. It's a group that supports people to develop skills around how to interact with someone with an eating disorder. And there's also skills-based caring for an eating disorder, which is a textbook for carers so that they can learn about eating disorders and learn how to support them. And there's also a number of places around Ireland which actually run specific care skills groups, including in our service for family members. Then over time, people may have other comorbid mental illnesses. So we already spoke about depression, anxiety, obsessionality. So getting specific help with those to try and remove a stressor from their lives, and try to come up with some sort of plan and accountability around how they're going to stick to regular eating. Sometimes people can do it themselves by keeping a good record of what they eat. Sometimes people enlist the help of friends or family to sort of make sure their schedule fits around them, that they'll always eat breakfast with maybe their parents. They might have a co-worker that they'll have lunch with, and then in the evening they might meet a friend, and that they have some sort of plan around how they're going to do that. And then I guess finally the last thing to say is sometimes people need to recognize when it's time to take a break, and that could be pressing pause on their college degree, it could be going on leave from work, and sometimes that's necessary at certain levels of severity, not to just do and to just sit at home, but to do with a clear intention that you're fully taking on a plan of working with a specialist team, working with an expert therapist, or potentially going for an inpatient admission to try and get on top of your eating disorder sufficiently that then you can continue to do that longer term work when you're back in your life, when you're back in college, you're back at work, you're back with your family. And that can be something that is a very difficult decision to make, but actually it sometimes is a decision that does need to be made in the interest of recovery, that you do need to maybe pause and step out of certain aspects of your life for a short time to engage with treatment. So if people are trying to take on a role in supporting someone with an eating disorder, the number one thing I would say is to try and make sure you've got the right sort of education about it. So we would recommend engaging with Bodywise as a group that has a lot of literature online that people can learn about how to be a carer, what sort of approach to take, and also that they can get some background understanding of what exactly is going on with the eating disorder, because they can be very complicated and they really are not part of your standard education that people would necessarily have received over the course of their life. So it is something to learn and upskill themselves. After that, modeling healthy eating behavior is really important. It can be really tricky for someone with an eating disorder to recover if everyone at home is on a diet. So trying to model the same level of regularity, the same level of trying to manage kind of reasonable portions, same kind of healthy attitude towards exercise that you'd like your loved one to have. Try to avoid confrontation, try to avoid being, the meal police, that you're kind of staring at someone, counting what they're eating, and then maybe chastising them afterward or accusing them of not eating things, trying to take a supportive, non-confrontational role. That's really important as well. And really just trying to remain curious and trying to have supportive conversations rather than sort of conflict, maybe getting into arguments with people, because often those arguments aren't really with your loved one, they're with the eating disorder, and the eating disorder is not necessarily able to engage in conversations in a rational way. So sometimes those arguments can just go around in circles and they really just don't move things along for someone. So trying to be supportive rather than kind of direct and confrontational is what I would say about the kind of interaction style that people would need to have with their loved one. I think as a society, our literacy around eating disorders is quite poor. It's something that people maybe kind of have seen representations on TV or in movies or magazines, things like that, but they really wouldn't have had a lot of first-hand experience with it. And it's something that is not really discussed, not really taught at all. So I would say that what we should be trying to do is, as a society, reduce the stigma around eating disorders, make it something that is much more accessible for people to talk about and much more obvious and accessible to people, where they can go to get help, who they can speak to, what they should be looking for, even that if they're going to their GP, that they have an idea that they're asking for something. They're not just coming with a problem. They're saying, I have a problem and actually I think I need treatment for it. I'd like to speak to an expert. So I think it's something that really we need to reduce stigma and raise awareness for people to know those things and for people to be able to access them. One of the tricky problems with that is you can reduce stigma and you can raise awareness, but if there isn't ultimately services and treatment at the other side of that, people can then run into a brick wall. And that's something that a lot of people in Ireland are all too familiar with, that services either don't exist, or if they do exist, they're very new, and maybe even in the area the primary care teams don't know how to access them. So what I would say to people is look for help, and what I would say to kind of Ireland as a society is that we need to be more open to talking about it. We need to be more better at signposting people where to go and how to get help, but then also we need to really up what is available for people, and there are sort of significant gaps in what's available for treatment of eating disorders throughout the country, and that's something that really needs to be improved.